Everyone loves to listen to a good book, and there are so many wonderful ones to choose, so we decided to bring you this podcast of Stories Come to Life. Each episode features a story from either classic or modern literature, especially chosen to be interesting and exciting to hear. So sit back, relax, and listen to this story come to life. Welcome to Stories Come to Life. I am your host, Kathryn Lopez Luker. Cress has tentatively reached the upper level of popularity in her high school. So when a girl who really wants to be Cress's friend invites her to spend the night at her house, Cress is torn. Should she go and perhaps risk falling from the popularity heights? Or could her approval perhaps raise Ina to that coveted level? As in most of Cress's adventures, things are not always easy to judge from the outside, and Cress has to listen to her heart. Now sit back, relax, and listen to this story come to life. Cress Delahanty by Jessamyn West. Chapter 9. 13. Spring, Part 2. "Who is this Ina?" her mother asked Cress. "Where does she live? And I thought Honor Gallagher was your friend of the moment." "Honor is," Cress said, "but she can't be thinking of me every minute. And Ina's full name is Ina Inez Wallenius," Cress answered. Cress didn't care whether her mother said yes or no about this visit. Without telling her mother, she had assigned to her, for the moment, the role of fate. And Cress was perfectly willing that fate should know everything she knew about Ina, and then decide. If her initials had been IWW instead of IIW, she would have stood for International Workers of the World, Cress said as an afterthought. "It's Industrial Workers of the World, isn't it?" said Mrs. Delahanty. "Anyway, it's Wobblies," Cress said. "Wobblies!" exclaimed Mrs. Delahanty. "Your friend Ina isn't a wobbly, is she?" "As a matter of fact, she isn't even a friend," said Cress. "Not a friend?" said Mrs. Delahanty, puzzled. "I thought you just said she was. I thought that was why you wanted to visit her." "What I should have said," Cress told her mother, "was that Ina wants me to be her friend." Cress didn't think it would be good taste to say just how much Ina seemed to want her for a friend, or of any use to try to explain to her mother the high school's complicated social structure, a structure upon whose upper level she was now located but not established, and upon whose lower level Ina stood, reaching upward. A visit could put Ina up where she was, or just as easily put Cress down where Ina was. Cress thought it was her duty to give Ina her chance. This was one of the reasons she preferred to leave everything to fate. There was more responsibility in the visit than she cared to assume. "She's a nice girl, is she, this Ina?" Mrs. Delahanty asked. "Oh, she's a very nice girl," Cress said. She didn't say that in her opinion, Ina was too nice. She didn't know how that could be possible, but some people were certainly too nice. Ina wasn't too nice in the sharp, old maidish way to which some girls are born. Handkerchiefs in clean triangles, salt for their hard-boiled eggs in little waxed paper envelopes, hair ribbons in ready-tied bows. These girls, whatever their ages, seemed like ants to Cress, and she got on very well with them all. Ina hadn't been born too nice. She was that way because she chose to be. And one nice habit she had was just about the most unpleasant Cress had ever heard of. She carried a toothbrush to school with her, and every day after lunch she brushed her teeth in the girls' restroom. And when she had finished, she would smile at herself, so that at least half her teeth, softly shining, were reflected in the basement's gloomy mirror. Then she would slowly close her full pink lips over her clean teeth. Why did that seem a bad thing to do? Cress couldn't say, but it did. And watching her, Cress would shudder. "Wallenius," said Mrs. Delahanty. "What is that, Swedish?" "I guess so," Cress said. "Anyway, Ina looks it." Ina's hair was yellow-white, and she wore it in heavy sausage-like curls low on her neck. She had heavy white eyelashes and eyebrows, big murky blue eyes, and loose-appearing golden skin. "She's an orphan," Cress said, thinking she should perhaps give Fate more to work on. "An orphan," her mother repeated. "She surely doesn't live alone, does she?" "I mean, she's a half-orphan," said Cress, for whom a mother was still the most of a family. "Her father's alive. Ina keeps house for him." "Have you ever seen him?" Mrs. Delahanty asked. "No, but he's a good old man, I know," Cress said with assurance. "Ina says he reads a chapter from the Bible out loud before every meal." "Well," said Mrs. Delahanty, "I don't know a reason in the world why you shouldn't stay all night with Ina if you want to. Where does she live?" "Kettle Hill," said Cress. "Oh," said her mother. Cress knew what that "oh" meant. Kettle Hill, although only 10 miles distant by road, and 6 by the spur line down which the tank cars rumbled, carrying the hill's oil to the main tracks, seemed a world away from the valley, with its orange groves where the Delahantys lived. It was off by itself, separated by its location and work from the ranches. Did anyone ever go there, Cress wondered, besides the drillers, the riggers, the pumpers and their families? One evening when out for a drive, Mr. Delahanty had taken his family up the road to Kettle Hill, and there, Cress had seen, the road stopped. It didn't climb on further into the brown cactus-covered, snake-inhabited foothills, but ended in a loop among the derricks at the hill's top. And though the settlement was on a hillside, Cress always thought of it as being in a dark pocket. It was dark there, not only because the earth was oil-soaked and pocked with sump holes that shone like greasy bruises in the gray dust, but because the oil people, wishing for something green amid the barren forests of their derricks, had planted years ago pepper trees along their streets. Now that the trees were old, their foliage sprayed outward in dense, smothering cascades, setting the oil workers' homes in gloomy caverns of shade. And it was dark there because the hill blotted the sun out early. While children in the valley below still played in the slanting light of afternoon, the houses of the oil workers would already be deep in evening shadows. The sun, going down behind a Kettle Hill derrick, sometimes seemed to Cress, watching from her own back steps in the valley, to set it ablaze for a second. She had often seen real flames there, when a gusher, coming in with force, blew its casing head and caught on fire. Then, until the flames were quenched, Kettle Hill would look like a fiery torch held up toward the night sky, and gas pockets, exploding, would rattle valley windows with a doomsday sound. And even when all was going quietly on Kettle Hill, it was not really quiet there. Day and night, the throb and stomp of its engines, the sullen, hollow suck of its pumps filled the air. The sound was so constant that days went by when Cress did not hear it at all. And then suddenly, in the dead of night, she would be awakened by it, sit bolt upright and ask herself, "What is that terrible sound?" "Ina can't help living there," Cress said to her mother accusingly. "Where your folks are, there you have to be." "Why, I never said she could help it," Mrs. Delahanty answered. "I never even suggested she would want to help it. And I think it would be a very nice thing for you to visit her." Cress didn't know whether it would be a nice thing or not, but anyway, the matter was now decided. She was going. She felt very lonely packing. On the evening before the day she was to leave, she started putting together what she would need for her visit. She was using a little satchel of her father's as an overnight bag. It was small enough not to be awkward to carry to school on the bus. She was packing things she couldn't possibly need because, in her mind, the trip was somehow momentous. She had made a list and was checking off articles on it, like an overseas traveler. Her father watched her a while from the doorway of her room. "Cress," he asked, "have you drawn up your will and taken out travel insurance?" Cress looked up from the midst of the articles she was checking. Bottles containing iodine, camphorated oil, attar of roses, hand balm, green ink, a package of Band-Aids, a comb cleaner which she had never used in the 2 years she had owned it, a spray of lavender tied with frayed silver gauze and fast breaking down into lavender dust, a little book bound in purple suede and called Flowers from Tennyson. "Let's see," said her father. "Just how long is it you're to be away from us?" "Till Thursday," said Cress bleakly. "A whole day?" Mr. Delahanty asked. "Are you taking a calendar with you? I wouldn't want you to lose track of time while you're being away." Cress knew her father was being funny, and she tried to smile, but her face seemed to have lost all of its springiness. It seemed to be nothing more than flesh loosely covering the front of her head, and useless for purposes of expression. She folded a hairnet of her mother's and put it in the satchel. "Crescent?" Mr. Delahanty said. "I bet a witch doctor in the heart of Africa couldn't have a crazier mess of junk than you've got there." Cress nodded, but couldn't explain. She felt as if she might be an entirely different person when she got to Ina's. But different in just what way? She couldn't now tell. If, after she arrived, she were to find herself suddenly the kind of person who wasn't at home without a hairnet, she would wish she had a hairnet with her. Her father watched her a while longer. "You give me the creeps," he said finally, and walked on down the hall. Cress nodded to herself after her father left. That was just how she felt. Creepy. She crept about the rooms, slyly picking up things as if she were stealing them. Stealing from whom, she wondered? Herself? Stealing from the room, she guessed. She took her little flowered calendar from the wall, drew a circle around Thursday, May 20th, and put the calendar on top of everything else in the satchel. Then, as she noticed the small, unfaded spot it left on the wallpaper, tears came to her eyes. "Look here, Crescent," her mother said, coming into the room. "You know, you don't have to visit your friend Ina if you don't want to. No one's forcing you to go, you know." "Oh, I want to go," cried Cress intensely. "Besides," she added, "I feel it's fated." "Fated?" repeated Mrs. Delahanty. "Well, in that case, I guess there's nothing more to be said." "No," said Cress in a voice of resignation. "I guess not," and closed her father's satchel with a snap. Next evening, when Cress got off the school bus at the foot of the hill with Ina, she was in a mood to be a perfect guest and to see the best in Kettle Hill. For one thing, she felt contrite. She had talked to some girls that day at school rather as if her visit to Ina were a slumming trip. "Ha! Going to see how the other half lives," she had said, and listened to the appreciative laughter. When the girls had asked her what she had in her valise, she said, "My crude oil-colored weekend wardrobe so I won't spot," and was rewarded with laughter again. If she had said these things in front of Ina, it wouldn't have been so bad. But she hadn't. she'd been two-faced, set them behind Ina's back, and the girls had still been snickering when Ina came up to them. The memory of this two-facedness made a sore spot in her chest, and as she climbed the street under the pepper trees, caused her to link her arm through Ina's. "It's a ratty little town," Ina said apologetically. "Why, it's not either," said Cress, putting balm on the sore spot. "I think it's romantic." In a way, a peculiar way, it really was. The fading sunlight came through chinks in the pepper trees and fluttered about upon the hard-packed earth, like a covey of yellow evening birds. The houses, though small and almost all alike because they were company-owned, were neat and whitewashed. Their porches were filled with large potted plants growing in cheerful red Hills Brothers coffee cans, or with smaller potted plants in green Delahanty peach cans. In some of the houses, the shades were drawn, for here people worked on shifts, and one man's night might be his neighbor's day. A picket fence, also whitewashed, ran the length of the street, and each man had a private gate to his yard, weighted in such a manner with old springs and defunct batteries that it swung shut of itself, and he need never give a thought to its closing. From under the pepper trees, the derricks were out of sight. It was only the smell of the oil, which was taste as much as smell, the sight of an occasional sump hole at the end of a side street, and the sound of the pumps that reminded Cress where she was. The sound of the pumps filled the air, deep, rhythmical, as if the hills themselves breathed, or as if deep in the wells some kind of heart shook the earth with so strong a beat that Cress could feel it in the soles of her feet as she walked along. Ina seemed not to hear the sound at all, and Cress felt it as much as she heard it. When she put out her hand to touch the palings of the fence, the sound was there, too. In the dead wood were tremblings which seemed almost alive, and which kept time with the deep, solemn beat of the pumps. This trembling, this sound that she felt in the soles of her feet and the palm of her hand, excited Cress. "There's a book in the library," she said, "called The Romantic Story of Oil." "Is there really?" said Ina. Ina had worn one of her best dresses to school, showing how important she thought Cress's visit. A soft silk pongee middy suit. She stopped beside Cress now and clasped her pongee-colored hands. "Oh, Cress Delahanty," she said, "I think you are the most sweet and tactful girl I know. Oh, I could just about hug you for that," she said, reaching out and taking Cress's hand inside her own soft, folding palm. "Most people," she confided, "just see the oil and smell the smells and miss the romance." "Most people," said Cress, working her fingers out of Ina's hand, "are blind." For some reason, Ina took her into the house by the back door. She said, "Here we are," and Cress, carrying her bulging valise, stepped over the threshold and into the kitchen. There she was at the end of her journey, and she looked about to see where that was. She was in a small, very neat room, she saw at once, the table ready set for supper, and chairs standing in front of each place. The room was close, with the smell a kitchen has, which is left each morning the minute breakfast is finished, and is not re-entered again until evening. The smell of breakfast coffee was still there, and another smell, as if in some cupboard a sack of potatoes had first sprouted, then rotted. Cress had never seen a more orderly room. Over the sink, can openers, egg beaters, potato mashers, all the kitchen implements were hung with careful regard for their size, tapering away from the big articles at the sink's edge to the small ones near the faucets. Half a lemon rested in the exact center of a saucer, and the saucer had been placed in the exact middle of the windowsill. The chairs, ranged around the set table, were all pushed under it at a uniform distance, and on the back of the stove was a stack of pot holders, the largest at the bottom, so that they formed a pyramid, calculated and orderly. The room was orderly in the way a sick room is orderly, or the room of a person who has little time or is for some reason unsure of himself. It reminded Cress of a house she had seen somewhere, a house she could only half remember. Then suddenly she remembered it altogether, the home of a blind friend of her mother's, a woman who had to depend solely upon her sense of touch to find what she wanted. Ina, as if she knew what Cress was thinking, said, "Father likes everything very neat. He says he wants to be able to put out his hand in the dark and find whatever he wants." Cress saw Ina looking at her, trying to discover if this seemed strange to her. "I expect I'm messy," Cress said. "Oh, no," Ina protested, leading the way into the living room. "That's the last thing I'd think of calling you." Cress paused in the doorway to the living room. "Why, it's nice," she exclaimed, and then worried for fear the surprise she had felt had shown in her face or voice. She had somehow thought of Kettle Hill homes as being faded, run down and dingy inside. This room was none of those things. It was a small, warmly colored, padded-looking room, as if, Cress thought, the Walenciuses had turned a footstool wrong side out and set up housekeeping in it. It bulged softly toward her as she stood in the doorway. Its innumerable curves reached out to touch her. Chairs were plump, the pillows round and solid as boulders. Lamps had egg-shaped bases. The phonograph of red shining wood bellied out about the middle as if swollen with the volume of sound it contained. Even the rug as she stepped into the room was not flat, but rose in a flowery fuzz under her feet, and the white lace curtains inclined toward her as if by pressure of a hand or face from outside. The light, already dimmed by its passage through the pepper trees, was dimmed once again before it got into the room through these curtains, and Cress was startled when her eyes, coming to the room's final dark corner, saw that a man, whom she knew by his resemblance to Ina to be Mr. Walencius, had been very calmly looking at her, while she had been looking at the room. He hadn't been reading or dozing. He wasn't sitting slumped, resting in his chair. He sat bolt upright, calmly watching the two of them, and when Cress's eyes discovered him, he rose very politely and spoke. "Good evening, girls." When Mr. Walencius stood up, Cress saw that he was a large man, broad as well as tall. Old, but only old like a father, not like a grandfather, as the Bible reading had led her to believe. His hair was yellow-white, like Ina's, not silvery with age, and he had a yellow-white mustache, very thick and soft-looking. "This is my friend, Cress Delahanty, Father," Ina said, and Cress shrank inside herself a little at seeing how proud Ina was to have a friend. "Cress," said Mr. Walencius. He had a pink and white skin, not a loose golden one like his daughter's, but his voice, Cress thought, had rather a loose golden sound, like a handful of rings clinked softly together. "Well, well," said Mr. Walencius, "so I'm to have 2 cooks tonight instead of 1. Then reaching out both hands, Mr. Walencius spread open his fingers so that they circled the top of each girl's head. He did not let his hands rest there heavy and inert, but moved his long, muscular fingers so that Cress could feel her scalp being pushed gently this way and that across the top of her skull. "With the two of you," he said, "I am going to expect something extra special this evening. I'm going to look forward to something out of the ordinary." Then, with a final pleasant twitch of their scalps, Mr. Walentius took his hands from their heads, and Cress heard him presently spitting and splashing in the bathroom as he brushed and washed for supper. Supper getting was very simple because Ina had planned it so carefully. Before she had gone to school that morning, she had boiled potatoes and made white sauce. Now she diced the potatoes and put them, together with pink rubbery cubes of bologna, into the pan of white sauce, and set the mixture on the stove. While this, whatever it was called, heated, she opened a can of beets, set them to cooking too, and got a bowl of deviled eggs out of the icebox. When the food was ready, and they had carried it, dished up on 3 plates to the table, Ina said proudly, "I tried to have different colors, and the hot food hot and the cold food cold." Cress thought she had succeeded very well. The bologna-potato mixture was pink and white, the beets a dark, handsome crimson, the deviled eggs in their green nests of lettuce leaves, gray and yellow. Steam rose above the helpings of heated food. The eggs shone with a cold and clammy sweat. But the cold food was warmer and the hot food much cooler before they ate, for Mr. Walentius came into the kitchen, clean and damp from his brushing and scrubbing, just as they put the plates on the table, and asked, "Will you read for us tonight, Miss Cress?" and placed an opened Bible in her hands. After they took their places, Cress read the chapter through. She was accustomed to the Bible, and knew that it was right for her to speak aloud words found there, which, elsewhere, it would be very wrong for her to whisper or even think about. So she was able to finish without stumbling or blushing, though she couldn't help feeling the chapter was a funny one to have chosen to be read aloud. Then she thought that perhaps the Walentiuses were reading the Bible straight through, and did not think it right to pick and choose among God's words. After the reading was finished, and they had begun to eat, Mr. Walentius asked, "Did you understand what you read?" Cress wasn't sure whether she had or hadn't. If she said yes, she thought she might be asked to explain. So she said, "No." "Ah, so," said Mr. Walentius. "An old-fashioned home, I expect. Your friend here, Ina, has been long instructed." Ina got up just then to put the tea on to steep, and Cress ate steadily while she was gone, her face low over her plate. The clock in the living room struck 5:30, and she remembered how early that seemed at home, still afternoon. While here it was already evening, supper half finished, and night not far distant. At home, her father would be just coming in from the orchard, the slanting sunlight making golden the dust that swirled up around his horse's feet. Her mother would be at the end of the driveway, picking up the evening paper and carrying a tidbit of news from it to her father in the barn, before she went back into the house to put supper on. It was strange to think that if the clock here and the one at home were both right or both wrong in the same way, they were striking this half-hour together. Thinking of both clocks, Cress felt herself to be a kind of meeting place for 2 varieties of time, home time and visiting time. Remembering home, these things seemed stranger than they had even on first sight. The half-lemon on the windowsill had, in the kitchen's growing duskiness, a sort of misted light of its own. Outside, the long dangling leaves of the pepper trees moved together with the sound of dry fingers meeting. The faucet at the sink went drip, 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 and Crescent thought of that falling movement and that sound never stopping, day after day, inside the silent, closed house. Ina was a long time setting the tea to steep, and the slight clatter she made sounded distant and muffled, measured, too, as if Ina were listening for the thump, thump of the wells, and spacing her movements to keep time with theirs. "Have you ever been kissed?" Mr. Walentius asked suddenly. Cress knew at once that he didn't mean by relatives. Keeping her eyes on her plate, she said, "No." Finally looking up, Cress saw that while Mr. Walentius's eyes were blue like Ina's, they were not at all murky, but had instead a shining glaze like varnish across their blueness. "You're big enough, you know," Mr. Walentius said, smiling. "I guess it goes more by age than size," Cress said miserably, and was glad that just then Ina came to the table with the tea and dessert, and that there was no more talk of kissing. When they rose from the table, Mr. Walentius said to his daughter, "I'll take Cress out for a little walk while you do the dishes, Ina." Cress's heart sank. "I wouldn't feel right not helping," she said. "Washing them alone," Mr. Walentius told her, "is a little punishment I had planned for Ina. A little reminder, isn't that true, Ina?" "Yes," said Ina, almost under her breath, and went quickly about the clearing up, so Cress could see no polite way of escaping the invitation. Mr. Walentius put his hat on his head and took from behind the door to the living room a knotted and burly stick. "In case we come across a snake or two," he said as they went down the kitchen steps. "I enjoy killing those fellows." This made Cress feel better. A walk with a purpose, not just wandering about in the dusk with an almost total stranger. "I killed a rattlesnake once," she told him. "How?" asked Mr. Walentius. "Stoned it," said Cress. "I can think of better ways." So could Cress, but when you were alone and barefoot, what other way was there? "My father shoots their heads off," she said. "You find many down there in the groves?" "Not so many any more," Cress said. "They slide down the main street here, as much at home as the oldest inhabitants," Mr. Walentius said. "I guess they are the oldest inhabitants. They lift their heads up and give you the once-over as they pass by. Maybe I'll have a chance to show you." Cress, who had hunted snakes herself and knew how scarce they were when looked for, thought the chances for this were slim, though she was too polite to say so. They came out from under the pepper trees, where the air had been hot and close, and turned down a side street. Overhead the sky, which they could now see, still held considerable light, and there was a streak of muddy yellow above the hills to show where the sun had set. At the bottom of the street, they came to a sump hole, not one of the big ones, no more than an eye, liquid and dark, reflecting the sky. It shimmered iridescently where water had seeped in with the oil, and rose upward here and there in bubbles, as if it were an eye that could breathe as well as see. Mr. Walentius stirred it a little with the point of his stick, then went off to poke about among the straggling trees and bushes that grew at the sump hole's upper edges. Sump holes always made Cress uneasy, whether they were large ponds or only small ragged pools like this one. It seemed unnatural to find a pool of oil instead of water in the ground. This one was stranger than most because, lying at the foot of a little arroyo, down which there was a trickle of water in the winter months, it had stunted willows and elders, dusty castor bean and tobacco plant shrubs growing about it, like a real pond of water. Several birds, having seen the light reflected in it, and mistaken it for water and dipping too low, had died there. Dragonflies and moths had darted down to drink, and never risen again. It was a very strange place, yet peaceful. No sounds except the pumps, the dry, placid singing of insects in the faded grass, and Mr. Walentius's quiet poking about in the elder clump. It was half pleasant, half frightening standing there, frightening to think that if she were as easily fooled as a bird or dragonfly, she too could plunge in and not come out. Pleasant to think that though she stood on the edge of danger, she was safe because she saw it. "Aha!" cried Mr. Woolentzius. "What did I tell you?" He came out of the elder clump with a heavy snake hanging across his walking stick. Fearful of falling, the snake balanced itself there, its head slightly lifted, its tongue flicking in and out so quickly that in the dusk it seemed almost that a vapor came from its mouth. Cress jumped quickly backward as Mr. Woolentzius advanced. Then she saw, even in the fading light, that what he had picked up was nothing more than a poor gopher snake that had been probably out hunting a mouse for supper. "It's nothing but a gopher snake," she said. "Nothing but a poor harmless gopher snake." "A fine fellow," Mr. Woolentzius replied, as if agreeing. "Fat and sassy. I'll just put him in here to cool off a bit." Then, with a gentle movement, Mr. Woolentzius laid, rather than threw, the soft, brown, harmless thing in the sump hole. Cress could not believe her eyes. So terrible a thing to do! Involuntarily, she took hold of Mr. Woolentzius's wrist. "It will die," she told him. "Maybe so, maybe not," said Mr. Woolentzius. "It's too early to say. Sink, swim, sink, swim," he said. "Sink, swim." It was almost as if the snake heard and obeyed. Oil-covered, eyes blinded, tongue motionless, it struggled. It rose and sank, rose and sank. "Sink, swim," said Mr. Woolentzius. "Up, down, in, out." Behind the blunt, striving, blinded head, making its horrible effort to rise, yet falling back again, the snake's body moved with such energy that against anything with less resistance than oil, it would have broken free. But the oil held like fingers. Along the whole of her body, Cress felt the terror and effort of that struggle. The oil in her own eyes, the taste of oil in her own mouth. "Save him," she implored. "Save him. It's wicked to do that. It hurts him so." "Sink, swim," said Mr. Woolentzius. "Sink, swim." A bird darted near the surface of the sump hole, then flashed away. The evening insect sang on. There was a little flurry of wind among the elder leaves. "Sink, swim," said Mr. Woolentzius. "Under, out." The snake's head lifted and fell. It kept time, it seemed, not only with the words Mr. Woolentzius spoke, but with the thud and suck of the pumps, and with the rhythmical pressure of Mr. Woolentzius's fingers on Cress's hand, which she now realized he was holding. "It's dying!" Cress cried, her shrill voice disturbing all that orderly timekeeping going on so relentlessly about the sump hole, and weeping not only for the snake, but for herself. She plunged away from Mr. Woolentzius and began desperately to run. The last half-mile down the spur line, she walked. She had stopped crying a mile or so before that. By the time she stood on her own front porch, she had stopped catching her breath, too, and had wiped her face fairly clean with the bottom of her skirt. It was so natural to be there, and to see her mother and father sitting by the open window talking, that everything else, the whole visit, orderly kitchen, lemon that shone like a light, sweating eggs, snake, sump hole, even Mr. Woolentzius, seemed objects she might have imagined in the 2 minutes between stepping outside to see the stars and going back into the house again. But when she opened the screen door, she realized that she had actually been away, for her mother, very startled, jumped from her chair and said, "Why, Cress Delahanty, how on earth do you happen to be here now?" Cress didn't know what answer to make. It seemed foolish to say, "Because Mr. Valencia's drowned a snake in a sump hole." She thought of saying, "Because it's fated, I guess," but that wasn't true. What had been fated was for her to spend the night at the Valenciases. She had broken that by running. "I guess I was homesick," she finally said. She saw her father and mother look at each other. Her father stood up. "Well," he said, "I'm glad you were. And you didn't get here a minute too soon. I was just on the point of putting us together some kind of bedtime snack. How does that sound to you?" It sounded good, but Cress was silent. She sat down in her father's chair and nodded yes to him, because suddenly she was too tired to speak even so small and easy a word. This is your host, Kathryn Lopez Luker. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Stories Come to Life. Be sure to join us next time when we continue to listen to Cress Delahanty by Jessamyn West. I'd love to hear from you, so please send me an email to kluker@marshallpl.org. I'll talk to you again soon.